Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temco. This is Stellaris MegaCorp, the third installment of the bigger expansion of Stellaris. It is a company with a 2.2 update, and here is a deep dive review of exactly that. Now, usually I try to combine the actual update with the actual review content and go over the entire game's changes. In this case, I just want to zoom in on the main changes with the MegaCorp expansion, and I'll guide you through them step by step, what I think is great, what I think is not so great, and what I think is absolute dog shit garbage. That all said, it's the Stellaris. It is one of my favorite games of the last couple of years. I have over 300 hours in this title, so anything I say is probably a little bit biased in that direction, just so you're aware. Let's go ahead and dive straight on in. As always, I would start with the options menu, but really nothing has changed in terms of options or settings in the game at all. What has changed is the actual in-game performance. That has gone down the drain further and further with each update, and that is no different for this update for Stellaris. Once you hit the mid-game stage, where you are running maybe around 2350, 2400 in terms of timeline, you do end up with a larger map, especially in the 20 to 30 FPS range. Now, in the past, I've said that this is not a big deal. We can deal with this. It's not a high-paced, intense game that you need it, but when you get stutters just scrolling through the map like you do right now, that's not okay, and the developers really have to do something about that. Even if they spend a whole patch cycle just on performance, that would be a good choice. As it stands, this is a hard sell on just that alone. I'm running a 1080 Ti with a overclocked i7, and I'm still getting those issues. And I'm pretty sure higher end CPUs, higher end PCs that are more modern than this one will still run into those same bottlenecks. And that is simply not acceptable in a modern day, and it's not acceptable in a modern age at all, where this should be a simple sanity stuff instead of a big selling point that your game actually runs in any acceptable fashion. Now, having said that, the second main issue with the MegaCorp expansion is the unmitigated amount of bugs and issues. Now, normally there's always a few bugs with a release, especially a bigger patch, that while they iron out a few things here and there. And most of these issues are caught in the first couple of days. A couple of hotfixes later, they're all sorted. Is that the best way to do it? No, of course not. It would be better to release without any bugs. But that is the reality for Stellaris. Now we're in several weeks after this expansion released, and we still have major issues. Population spawning without any resource points, research not being granted, options not being available for progression within a certain path. It is mind-bogglingly broken in some areas outside of performance, and I would hold off on buying this until those issues are fixed at least. Now, there is a rolling beta patch that is being updated as we go forward. That said, there's also a couple of really important notes to make, is that a rolling beta doesn't cover all the fixes. And while they fix most of the egregious stuff, there's still quite a few smaller issues that are still very prevalent. Enough about the ranting, enough about the moaning. Let's talk changes. The biggest change is obviously the way planets work. Now, in the past, if you also check my previous videos that I've covered in the past for Stellaris, you'll notice that the planets are very different indeed. Previously, you had a grid-based system with each tile representing one population and one building. Now, you have a grid-based system for buildings where you build them based on the amount of population, but as you can see, they unlock per 5 population, which means you have way more population now to work with. Now, they still have the same growth rates, though slightly higher for most scenarios, and they'll still increase in the same way and fashion and form. But now you can also do things like growing a specific type of subset of your species, or even assembling different types of robotics if you have those available. And if you're purging, you can also purge one by one based on the species. Overall, nothing really big changed in this specific area, but the big changes are that now you have 3 tiers of individuals, and this goes for all empires, including Gestalt consciousness or robotic empires, though they do work slightly different in some scenarios. Each tier has, based on the buildings you have, both in terms of districts, which is now where you have your mining and your power generation or your food generation, as well as the amount of buildings you have that generate certain jobs, such as researchers or even metallurgists to get the new resource alloys where you build your spaceships with, among other many things. You have clerks, farmers, miners, technicians, specialists that work some of the more advanced buildings, cops, as I said, metallurgists, and so on. And then you have rulers, which is the executive class. Now, the main reason for this divide is that each of these three tiers of citizens, so to say, has a different need. So executives take more amenities, are higher upkeep units than, for example, specialists that do have some needs, but they have fewer of them compared to workers that have fewer needs yet again, especially in the upkeep for consumer goods. Now, previously, there was an upkeep in energy, there was an upkeep in minerals. The addition of consumer goods is a really good way of separating those two. Now, why would you want to separate minerals, consumer goods, minerals, energy, and alloys, which are used to create ships, such as in your shipyard, for example, destroyers now take alloy. And later on, new ships take on special rare resources, such as volatile modes, exotic gases, rare crystals, and living metal. Now, previously, these rare minerals and rare resources were already available in some fashion, but they have been fundamentally changed. And that is sort of the name of the game for the MegaCorp expansion. It is now all about trade. How do you deal with trade? How do you generate value within your empire? And how does that value translate to more moolah for you or someone else? The interesting bit here is not just that you have access to all these weird different things that you can do, you now also have access to a variety of different ways of getting those resources. One of the ways now, for example, volatile modes, which is a new resource, is by simply creating a mining station in orbit when you have that research enabled. And that goes for many more of them. For example, living metal is still the same way as previously. You create a research station in the air, and there you deal with that specific mineral. But you can also go to your cities and your planets, and from there create some of the buildings that will replace these resources based on, of course, research. So now I have an exotic gas refinery I can build that has an upkeep of 10 minerals, but turns those 10 minerals into 2 exotic gases. And those exotic gases are then again used, for example, for upgrading research labs that at a higher tier cost more to upkeep, but also have the additional cost of using a rare resource. This really makes it vitally important to have those rare resources at hand. Now, obviously, if you only have a +2 on your rare gases, you can upgrade 2 research stations. Makes sense, right? But if you need to build a cruiser or a destroyer or some other fancy high-end building, you may need to switch to the third major change, which is the global market. Now, previously, trade in Stellaris was always a little bit of a fiddly bastard. If you couldn't produce it yourself, it probably wasn't worth trying to get unless you could trade with some of the NPC trade hubs. And those are still there, but they mostly now focus on strategic resources and now having that as a side dish. Now they're all about strategic resources. Why? Because there is now a galactic market. Now initially, when you just start up the game, you don't have the galactic market, you have a local variant of that. In all terms of functionality, the only difference is the market fee you pay. This market fee can be lowered in several different fashions. One is being the market leader, EA setting up the galactic market. This is done if you are a MegaCorp type of civilization, which is a new civilization type, where you can do this. That lowers your market fee by 10%. On top of that, you can add some edicts and some various different civics for your empire that lower it by another 10% or 20%, depending on research and so on. So you can get as low as 5%. At least that's as low as I've ever gotten it. That said, when you trade something, you can either trade the resource you want to trade away for energy, at a rate of 1 for 1.18 in this scenario, or 1.1.00, or 1.9, which is much more expensive, obviously, or even 1.2.45. And if you buy it back, obviously it's way more expensive. So I'll be selling consumer goods at 1 consumer good for every 2.45 energy, which is a great deal if you have enough consumer goods, but if I have to buy them, it's 1 for every 3 energy. So it's always more expensive to trade than to produce. But sometimes you simply cannot produce, or you need a big boost of resource in a specific segment right then and there. For example, if I want to sell 2,000 or 3,000 of my minerals because I need access to more of these lovely alloys, I can do just that, go into my shipyard and then go ahead and craft myself a destroyer and a corvette. This is pretty damn great as a way to keep your economy flowing and moving even when you are missing key resources because you either don't have the technology to get them or don't have any of those in your empire to deal with. It's a great way of diversifying your spend. With that come a few other changes. Now, not only do you have migration treaties and non-aggression pacts, you also have research agreements, which you already previously had, but they've been changed a little bit, and you have commercial pacts that create trade agreements between your empire and the other empire where you both benefit based on trade value. Now, trade value is yet another variant on top of all the changes happening here. And it's actually very straightforward. Each system generates trade value based on population, based on resource in it, based on trade routes passing through it, and so on. And when you have trade routes passing through it, they get picked up, and those trade values are translated directly into energy when they arrive at the destination space. So for example, from Barbon, I have a trade hub here that has a trade route to Amorous, which is my capital. Here we go, and that's the trade value that generates 100% of the trade value over to its capital building. And some of this is lost to piracy. Some of this might be lost due to too long trade routes having drop off due to security loss, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty neat additional layer upon of all these other added changes to the game. But does that make the game more fun? And the answer there is that it does, and also kind of doesn't, because the biggest change in my opinion is the way expansion has been changed. And this is where it loses for me a lot of the fun in a Stellaris game. With the Empire Sprawl now, you have an administrative capacity of your empire, and this is measured by the amount of districts, systems, and colonies you have. Each of these has a different point value. For example, a colony costs 2 points, a district costs 1 point, and that generates your entire empire size. And you have an administrative cap of about 30 base plus 20 because I'm a corporate empire, and I can add research on that to go to 70, 90, 110, and so on. But you get to that cap really fast. And you can see how small my empire is compared to other empires around me, and I'm already over that cap, even though I've been trying not to do so. And the cap penalty, especially for corporate, is really fucking harsh. My technology immediately cost me 10% more. Tradition adoption, 16% more. And leader upkeep is 33%. It is punishing, and it really limits your expansion capabilities. Now, one thing about Stellaris is that building tall is never as fun as building wide. Because building wide means you have more to do, more to keep track of, more to plan ahead for. Borders, friction with other empires, alliances, placement of your empires, placing of your armies, placing of strategic waypoints and waygates so you can transfer everything over should you be invaded. All those things play a big part of, at least for me personally, the fun of Stellaris. When you have a tiny empire and you're building tall, it really just boils down to looking at this screen, watching the commercial zone tick up and down its build time, so you have a bit more amenity, so people are a bit happier, so crime goes a bit down. And while that creates the same value in the end, by for example creating interesting and engaging diplomacy and exchange, for example, I now can create a defensive pact with this empire, and it's a pretty damn good one. Or I could even start trying to get them onboarded into a federation. It is a pretty damn good system. But it's not fun, and that sort of is where the game loses me for the first time in a Stellaris expansion. I love the additional technology, I love the additional hierarchy of strategic resources, the additional changes to the way trade routes work, and the way you have to be smarter about empire placement. I love the additional diplomacy options and interchangeable options for gameplay, even with the Gestalt consciousness, where you still have some of those aspects even if you don't have access to the Galactic network because, you know, you're hive mind. All in all, this touches on a lot of really interesting things, but as soon as you hit the sprawl limit, you're sort of stunted from growth. As soon as you hit the cap limitations of your growth speed, you are stunted from growing further. And that is a major issue for me personally, because a large part of the way resources are generated on your planets is through these workers. And if you go to your population, your workers, you can see, for example, I have 13 free jobs that are clerks. I have 1 free job as a farmer that generates food, miner, 1 free job, etc. It's very easily possible that when you open up a new empire, suddenly people flock to that and you lose massively in the amount of resources you have available. Now, previously in Stellaris, people would still migrate to different systems, but one, there were fewer pops to migrate over, so it was less of a hassle to figure out where what moved, when, why. And in this case, you could, in the past, change population location within a planet, what job they were doing. So if you're like, I really need electricity right now, I can deal with a little bit less research, you could move a few pop over to the electricity generation and leave the research for later while you solve the problem in the immediate term for migrations. Now, if you say, I really don't want all these artisans, you can only lower the job priority. But it doesn't mean they will go to a different job, it just means they won't go to that job. So if you really need workers to be clerks, I can lower all these priorities for these jobs, and then I will definitely have clerks. But if I need clerks and technicians for power, well, the only choice I have is to hope that clerk somehow is more important than technician, or they're equally important, and the game will magically balance them out, which it doesn't. And that is a damn shame. So overall, there are a couple of major issues I have with Stellaris at the moment. Obviously, the sprawl being limited to very small empires if you want to keep within a reasonable empire administrative penalty is a very big one. The limitations based on the population growth and research capacity is also a big one for me personally. And even though those two alone sort of hesitate me from enjoying the corporate empire gameplay, they don't prevent others from doing so. I am very certain, because I've played a Hive Mind variant on this very same patch and I enjoyed that quite a bit. Now, that all said, it's not a bad expansion, but the performance issues as well as the issues with bugs, and then for me personally, the issues with expansion and prioritization of population really boil away some of the enjoyable macro-based gameplay of Stellaris into a much more boring micromanagement-based system where I'm just sort of only babysitting population after population and very little else. And that, I think, is neither the purpose nor the goal of Stellaris. As such, it pains me to say that I cannot recommend you get this expansion right now. On just the technical issues alone, I would hold off for a few weeks until they patch things out. But it has been a few weeks since the original release of this expansion, and they still haven't patched them out, which I would have liked to see happen ASAP. On top of that, unless you really think you will enjoy a small, compact Empire gameplay, the MegaCorp expansion doesn't provide that much more benefit in terms of, for example, the Megacorporation Empire type. It adds some cool new things, such as empire building and creating substations in other empires, and there's some other things as well, which I would recommend you check the patch notes for if you're interested. But overall, it doesn't really add that much more cool stuff, unlike some of the other expansions have done. That all said, it remains Stellaris, it remains one of my favorite games ever, and even though I don't like the mega corporations themselves as an empire, playing with a Gestalt consciousness with all the new changes to the way diplomacy and trading works is really damn fun. And I would strongly suggest everyone creates a Devouring Swarm right about fucking now, because they are amazing. Stellaris MegaCorp is available over on Steam or on the Paradox Interactive website as always for $20 US or your regional equivalent. Though it is also available over on GOG these days, and that currently has a holiday sale running. Though this expansion in particular isn't in that sale, you get most of the other expansions and DLCs for quite a bit cheaper and get started with basically the same experience I have without the shitty corporate empire, in my opinion. If you like this video, do press that like button down below. If you didn't like this video, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose. And tell me what you think about the corporate mega empires you can build, or as they really are, corporate mini empires you can build, down in the comments below. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.